Yeah, exactly. We have so many questions that we want to ask you. We've been reading.
Throwing out.
Yeah.
So it's the first time in Europe, I think. How does it feel to be exhibited in Europe?
Yeah, my first exhibit here, yes. It feels great. It's incredible. I'm really happy about it. Excited.
There's sort of a different context of like the art world in America and here. Like, does it feel different to be embedded in this European artistic context, so to say?
Yes, because, I mean, to me it's foreign. So I know a lot of the history, but not the contemporary scene, kind of. So it's really interesting for me, and especially seeing the collection here, it's interesting to me to be exposed to so many post-war European artists, that these things I hadn't seen before, even in books. So sometimes things, you know, your sense of art history has holes in it, and it's nice to fill in the gaps and make connections, and I really love that.
And have your own art become part of it.
Yeah, and be part of the conversation, you know. It feels really nice.
Amazing.
And
So speaking of part of the conversation, I guess seeing the works like in person is obviously always an amazing experience. But for you as an artist showing in Europe for the first time, et cetera, what do you want to add to that conversation to the European?
I guess just maybe a different way of seeing paintings. Maybe just, you know, it's kind of like an object, like art is, to me, has so many little facets. It's just, I hope to add another little facet to the gigantic thing we call art that comes from a personal experience.
Can you maybe describe that point of view a bit more closely? Because we read a lot about how you try to manipulate the canvas a bit, so that it's maybe a statement about painting in today's world, like in the context of today, and how it expresses things. Is that true? Or?
Well, I don't really think of it so much like that. When I'm working in my studio, I'm more like playing with things, like if you're in the woods playing with sticks, or so it's just a different material. So it's the materials are in the context of fine art making. So that's my tradition, what I've been doing since I've been in art school. So when I'm in my studio, I'm not thinking about contemporary art or where I fit in at all. I'm just trying to create my own invention through the materials that I have at hand. So some of them are personal materials, like the shirt, and some of them are just scraps of things that I had from other paintings that failed. And so I'm just kind of recycling stuff to make these, but I'm not thinking of the bigger picture when I'm working.
Your work is so sculptural and three-dimensional, so would you consider yourself to be placed in the category of painting, or are you kind of leaning towards sculpture?
I think it's in the context of a painting. I like that format. I like that idea that, you know, what can happen in this rectangle. You know, I like that it's confining, but so much can happen. But it's a weird thing because for many years it seemed to me that not so much could happen, and that was very frustrating. So these kind of came out of that frustration. of wanting to think about painting differently than I had been, which was a more traditional way of like, you know, depicting space with the paint. So I thought I wanted to construct a painting.
So your background is actually much more traditional and like painterly.
I did for many, many years. I painted pictures that you're looking at a space, objects, still lifes, but they always had some kind of conceptual, abstract idea in them. And so I was always playing with those things.
One thing that we noticed, and I think it fits really well into how you say that the canvas is traditionally such a limited space, but then it opened up to you so much more, and we were just really surprised when we saw in the booklet that there are also pictures of the background of the canvas. So that's such an interesting way to think about how much richer it actually is than this like one surface, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the fact that you can see through the cracks, you're sort of aware of that space between the canvas and the wall. And kind of, I don't know, I wanted it to be very physically involving for myself and the viewer.
Yeah, we, to bring it kind of back to your comment of how you think you play in this sort of idea of playing with materials, we were talking a lot about like the sewing aspect and this idea of play, and it comes and how the two seem to be interconnected. And so we have a lot of questions for you about sewing, and maybe you could just kind of open up a little bit about why you've chosen to sew, how you pair it with this notion of play, because obviously sewing is a very labor-intensive task that kind of juxtaposes. Yes.
But I always thought of, I mean, some people have asked me if it's kind of a feminist idea, like women's work, but I wasn't thinking of that at all. To me, it's more like Frankenstein, you know, like or like a surgeon or some weird, like, you know, you're kind of putting limbs together to create this body in a way. So and also I always think of like a tailor as a man. So I didn't have that thing like, this is woman's work, like, but I don't know, I have always liked to do activities like that, kind of obsessive, and it's kind of a slow thing. But I can do it pretty fast. It's kind of, as long as I'm a little sloppy, it's fast, you know. You just do what you need to do to get them to stay together. And that's all I really want from the sewing. But then some of the actions that I sort of perform in the paintings are very fast. And so I like the two things together. Create maybe a kind of tension, because you can see that something happened with the sewing and some of the dripping, and some of the paint was kind of exploded I hurled like packets of paint at the canvas. So and some of them were colored pencil that I swept the floor with. I put the canvas on the floor and I tied up colored pencils and put them on a broomstick. So there's some actions, like you kind of feel like something happened because something did happen.
Was the whole idea of you incorporating sewing, is that something that you did like in your childhood, or you just incorporate it into your artwork?
It wasn't something I ever...
So it was just mainly for the work that you were creating?
Yeah, it was just a way to... It was almost like I wanted to like make the canvas, but I didn't have a loom. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I had all these scraps, and I wanted to start at really like ground zero to like sort of build and reinvent what a painting could be for myself. So just the materials at hand instead of going to the store and buying the canvas. And I had all these scraps. And I just took the scraps and pieced them together the way they could go for this. That was the first one over there.
And do you find like certain scraps or resources kind of work better than others? Like, are there some that you lean towards more so?
So the more, you see how this is like mostly just white gessos and the black. That was really the first, so that was kind of all I had. In the end, I had some scraps that were white and some that had black paint, and I thought, well, maybe I have some old things at home, like the blue jeans, the shirt, and the drawing I had done with the broomstick. And so things started accumulating, and then after I put them all together, I often take things out. So I'm deconstructing as well as constructing. And the pieces I take out are things that I think don't work in the picture. And so I toss them on the floor and piles form. And so from these piles, I kind of draw depending on what I'm working on. And so that kind of, they recycle into themselves, each other. And so the materials literally sometimes cross-pollinate. Like some of the pieces from this ended up in that. And that one.
Yeah.
Oh, that one, no, that one was its own
With its own.
thing. And this one here is, I don't know if those are from that or that, but they could be from that one. But I kind of, when my studio gets really messy, I start sorting through the piles so that I can find things more easily. So I might have a giant pile of just white pieces, or a giant pile of black and white pieces, colored pieces, and different types of cloth.
So do you lay out everything and then sew it together piece by piece, or do you just sort of start with one piece and then sew it and then do
I have like
another
3
piece?
or 4 pieces, and things start accumulating on the floor. And I don't have a set, like this is the top or the bottom or the sides of the picture. So they could be kind of any way. And then eventually when it gets bigger and bigger, I tape out the corners for the size. And it starts to get positioned. And then sometimes I kind of feel like, it's not till I start putting paint on, like for example, the pink one, the drips, gravity is causing the drips to go on the grid. You know what I'm saying? And to me, it kind of anchors something, like it kind of grounds me to do that. So I don't think this one has any of that. That they're going all different ways. I mean, I guess it just depends on the piece. I mean, each piece is each painting is sort of its own experiment that I'm working on.
Horizontally for the sewing, and when do you want to put it on the wall? When does it happen?
As soon as it gets big enough, I start to see how big it's going to be, and then I order the stretcher, and the stretcher arrives. Sometimes while the stretcher is being built, I fold it up and put it aside. I'm working on other things at the same time. And then the stretcher arrives, and then I take it back out and stretch it. As long as it's big enough to hold together, there might be missing parts, little small missing parts. And then once it's up on the stretcher, it completely changes, like my feeling about it, or what I think it could be or is or should be, or what it wants to be, And I just go from there. So that's really just phase 1, is sewing it together.
It's not meant to be on the floor. You wouldn't consider exhibit your works.
No.
It is.
I mean, I think that might be a sculpture, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I guess.
So maybe someday, I don't know. For now, it's enough for me to be thinking about it as a painting.
I'm curious technically, when you do put it on the stretcher, do they snap? And how do you decide for the spacing between Like each piece,
Oh.
you know, you can.
It's
you
kind
can sew
of
it
random.
tighter.
It's kind of random because they don't always fit perfectly.
Right.
You know. And I don't want them to be too perfect. So whatever they are, they are. And when I stretch it, it's incredibly strong. I don't know. I guess because there's so many stitches, but it's also it's upholstery thread, so it's very strong. I think it's nylon.
And do they change with time? Like the paintings? If they stretch a little bit, so?
I mean, not really, no. But sometimes I'll stretch it and there'll be like wrinkles or things. You know, the tension will be off, so I just take scissors and cut. And so I work on them. I sew them when they're on the wall too. Like if I cut something out and throw it on the floor and I have to put something in its place, I just sew it while it's on the wall.
And in terms of, I know there's this couple different pieces that have different colored thread. Is
Yeah.
that just I'm going to pick one, or you make the conscious choice to change the color?
Yeah,
of the
I
thread?
make a conscious choice because I just want the experience to be variegated, like it's just like in that microscopic world of variation, I think it adds something. I think I do that more now than I did with these pieces. So, but it's usually either black, white, or red for some reason. It seems it's less complicated. Like I don't want to get into all different colors, you know.
And just in reference to color, we were talking about like we know that you were inspired, like the kind of muted tones are from your studio when it used to seep through the walls and things like this, like the tones. So how has that changed over time, say from you moving studios? Like does your palette change or?
Yeah, I mean, I think.
Or are these the tones that you always just like to work with?
I've always been into I haven't really thought of this before. It's a good question. I mean, the studio does affect one, you know, and my studio is very textured and rough. But colors, you know, when I was in art school, I was very much into old master painting. And the older colors, you know, like umbers and all the ones with Italian names. And siennas. And I mean, I've always liked that. I mean, there's a quality about, I think this work keeps of, I've always liked very old things. And I don't know, it's just a personal feeling for those muted, more muted colors. Although the pink is kind of bright.
Or the blue.
Yeah, I mean, this one has a lot of kind of exotic colors.
Do you think that if you had like a really bright and colourful studio, do you think that would incorporate into your work more, or you'd still kind of stick with?
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine anyone would have a colorful studio. It's usually just like white walls.
Yeah.
But I've had a studio in the past that was more like this, with like the white ceiling and the white walls, but with no windows, like maybe one little window. But
And snow.
but when I've been doing these, yeah, my studio now is it's more like a barn, it's like an old carriage house stable. So it kind of has this kind of rustic quality with brick walls that partially.
That kind of transfers into your work. Like you can see your footprints there. And
Yeah, it's kind of a rustic, dirty, rough, sort of textured place.
So you said you were influenced by the old masters. Is there any other contemporary artists, or maybe?
Oh yeah, I mean that was mostly when I was in art school, but I think that really affected me. Or it could just be just a general personal. I mean, there's a reason I was into those colors more than modern colors. That's probably deeper, I don't know, psychologically. But after I left art school, I became more and more interested in post-war art and contemporary art.
And is there a particular artist or artists working or maybe dead who you would say has a direct link?
Yeah, I've been.
What do you think of Pollock? Let's say it.
Pollock? He's great, but I've never thought of him as like, oh, I just love like a deep connection. But do you mean because I'm doing things on the floor?
Yeah.
Because we've read that you kind of compared to him a lot, so we were just wondering.
Yeah, I guess Mario compared me in his essay.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yes.
I like his drip painting, but I think of him more of the thing about Pollock is that it was an overall thing that could extend beyond the edges in a way. I like Pollock, but I feel more close to Rauschenberg and Jasper Johns and I've really loved Polka. I know there's not a direct connection to this work, but I like his freedom of thought, seemingly one day to the next, you know. I like so many different artists.
And also, in the catalog, you are compared to artists like Burri and Maccarelli. What do you think about this? Because maybe visually they're very similar, but the creative process is completely different.
I'm very flattered to be compared to these people, but I didn't know too much about the tradition of post-war Italian art specifically until after I started making these, things were pointed out to me, like the Gutai movement in Japan and Italian post-war art. And then, amazingly, a big Burri show opened at the Guggenheim in New York, and that was just fantastic. So I actually felt like when I saw his work, and that was the first time I really saw it, and I think there's a couple of pieces here that were in the show that I saw upstairs. I kind of felt like seeing the work gave me permission. Like, oh, it's okay. It's okay to do this. Do you know how sometimes an artist can make you feel like, oh, that's kind of how they put it together, or they did this and they didn't do this. And maybe I could do something else. You know, it kind of gets your thoughts moving. And, you know, you feel like, well, you have like a kindred spirit or something from the past, which is a nice feeling. And it didn't worry me that, oh, am I copying this person? Like maybe it's too much the same, because I feel like although I'm using some of the same techniques, I'm going in another direction that's personal to me.
So you talk a lot about this idea of experimental and play and, you know, your personal materials and even your shirt being a part of your work. So is this sort of personal autobiographical narrative important to be infused into your work, or is that just something that you sort of do subconsciously and it just kind of happens?
Yeah, I mean when I did it, I'm aware of what I'm doing, but I don't seek it out too much. Like, I don't know, each one seems, you know, if there is something autobiographical that could work, I just use it. But it's just because they're in my environment more than
The titles?
a statement.
The titles of the paintings are related to some memories, I think. So.
Well,
Did you
they're
choose?
very specific to the paintings, so they're not. I guess they're very. The titles are personal in the way that the paintings are personal to me. So, this one is called "Goodbye, Old Friend," and the shirt had a tag in the back of the collar. It said "Old Friend." And I used to wear the shirt a lot when I was painting, and it was almost like a talisman. For years I wore it, and then one day I accidentally put it in a dryer, and it shrank. And it was pretty old and tattered. It had moth holes, and so it's time to give this up. But I just couldn't throw it away, so I just had it around in my closet. And I decided to use it in this. And the title I thought of a couple of years later, when I needed to title this. I felt like I wanted to title the paintings.
But even just
For
in
the show.
reference to the shirt, so you're saying that you were really, really attached to it. And I read that in the psychologist calling card that you were like not sure whether to put the number in the artwork.
Oh yeah.
But then you were thinking that nobody's really going to see it or it's not going to sell. So is this something that's related that you kind of were like, okay, I'll never actually really part with the shirt? Or was it like, okay, it's
well,
done?
I titled the painting after it arrived here. So I haven't, none of these had titles until they came here. And it was actually the interview. I mean, the whole time I was making this work, it was like I was pre-verbal. I was like a cave person. Maybe this will work, you know. It wasn't so literal in my mind. I know a lot of people think of words a lot when they're working, and it kind of adds to how they work. But I wasn't really thinking that way at all. And I had no idea, I couldn't come up with any titles, and it was actually doing that interview with Bob in the book that I started thinking of the work in a literary, wordy sense. And I had wanted to title them in the past, but I just couldn't come up with anything that felt meaningful, you know.
How did you arrive at, what is it, Queequeg? Queequeg. How did you arrive at that? It's such a unique...
Okay, so do you know who Queequeg is?
From
Moby Dick. Yeah, so he's from the South Pacific, so he has all this kind of ornamentation on him in the book. And when I was making this, the white parts kept reminding me of teeth, like almost like a necklace that would have big shark's teeth on it from a primitive or kind of society. I kept thinking of shark's teeth, and then I thought of Queequeg. I think he wears a necklace he wears all this jewelry made of, I don't know, seafaring bones and things, and I don't know, that's it. It's nothing too deep. It's just, and I love the sound of the name.
Yeah.
So I kept thinking this whole time, it's really striking how your working process and also your inspiration seems to come to you so naturally, like such an organic process, almost this like automatism in it, perhaps. Like it just.
Yeah, it's very intuitive.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah,
But you seem also to be very fascinated by the fragment. So it's kind of that is also repetitive in all of your paintings.
The fragments of, you mean?
That is like a map of fragments. And
Oh yeah, yeah. It's not like I conceive of the whole thing in the beginning at all.
And yet it comes together. Cohesive.
Yeah, I mean, actually, it doesn't come together. I mean, I feel like a big part of these is that they usually don't, and then I have to do something.
I see.
And then I have to sort of, like the pink one was just the striped cloth, I sewed it together, and then I dumped pink paint on it, and I was like, well, that's not, it just didn't feel like it was doing enough to interest me, so then I kind of hacked it with the white, and then it became three-dimensional. So it's like one idea got invaded by another one.
Is that why you chose to add the sculptural sort of three-dimensional element?
And then I thought of the opening it up, you know. I just didn't want to get precious about any of it, so I can not feel uneasy about taking things out or taking scissors and just starting to cut things. So it's very intuitive and loose.
And even though the work is so extremely personal, and I think it's a lot about the conversation that you have with the piece, so very much you and the art, I was wondering, since you've been referencing the whole recycling and just using the materials you see around you, is it also maybe somewhat a statement on sustainability or your personal sustainability?
You mean...
that might be far-fetched, but I was wondering... Just
you mean like ecological?
Yes, like recycling the materials that you find, and perhaps is that something maybe you also...
I know, it's not really a statement on that, but it's important. I mean, I like I said, I like kind of old things. So recycled things have that quality of... They have a history.
I kind of notice or think about that. It's quite a unique thing today, just to hold on to materials and have them dear to your heart, and then incorporate them into something almost like upcycling, sort of. So you use your old shirt and you see, oh, I can't wear it anymore, so I'll just make it into
Okay, so I see what you're saying, yeah. Okay, so that mindset is definitely a personal thing. And it's interesting that now I understand what you mean. There is a connection to... My parents were a little bit older than my people my age. Their parents were 10 years younger mostly. So my parents lived through the Depression era in the United States, but my friends' parents didn't. And I always noticed my parents saved everything. like when kids came to my house, they thought it was funny that there was like string in the drawer. And we didn't use paper towels because it's wasteful. But it was my parents' experience, and so my brother and sister and I are kind of like... I know other people whose parents were older too, and we always say, yeah, like we have this similarity. So that a thriftiness could be probably from that I would have the desire to save these things. Definitely.
When you're creating, are you thinking about the painting's relationship to the viewer? Because like the cracks, for example, we're kind of curious to look through them, or the structure is kind of jutting out into our space, so it's kind of this...
I mean, I feel like I want to entertain myself as much as whoever is looking at it. I don't know if entertain is the right word, but...
Engage.
Yeah, engage, or every experience I had making it, I want you to have. I mean, I want the viewer to feel like that I'm with them and we're making it, or do you know what I'm saying? Like you kind of, because I love it when I see paintings like that. When I feel like, sometimes I feel like, oh, it would be so fun. It must have been so great to paint this, and I can picture like the brush and the paint. You know what I mean? Do you ever feel like that?
It really reflects also in the aesthetic, since it's so focused on the creational process and the techniques you're using. Sort of all these techniques coming together, and it's really, I think you can really see the creational process. So imagine you in the studio, and like how maybe, you're putting the paint, and
And it's quite soothing too, like when you were talking about like Frankenstein, and there's this like different pieces coming together can be quite gruesome or quite violent, you know, but instead you have sort of this like very gentle, you know, cohesive feeling when you look at the pieces that they're coming together in a like very satisfying and part of the process way. Just
good. Yeah. And is this how you like it to be, your works to be exhibited, like a white wall? Because I know you can, the way you can see behind it. Is there ever a thought of maybe you'd put something that just the viewer can see if you go up close?
No, I think it should just be very obvious, like just because that's how they are made. I have a white wall.
Yeah.
And actually, the measurements of this room is very similar to my studio. The proportions. It's like long, and I have a wall and two. Well, I have like one wall and one. So it is really similar to my studio in here, except this is very fancy, clean, very clean. I have an old wooden floor.
Where do you work? Very general question, but
Where?
yeah, I mean.
Oh, in Bushwick, in Brooklyn. Yeah.
It's very interesting that in some works like Winning there is like a sort of narrative or idea of a story, and in others the evidence of the material seems much more important. So I was wondering if even in others' work there is maybe some really deconstructed space you were trying to represent, or if it's just really the material and their aesthetic.
Yeah, well, I wasn't. When I'm working on the floor, I can't really tell what's going to be spatial. So those things are kind of accidents, like the receding thing, the things that visually recede or come forward. They just kind of happen. I'm not planning them. So it's like that. But of course, I know if there's something very dark, it's going to recede. But it's not like I'm thinking, oh, I think something should recede here. Do you know what I mean?
Something that viewers should pay attention to, obviously, in your opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I want that variety. I heard on the radio in my studio once, it's kind of a dumb thing, but it's not dumb at the same time. I listen to a lot of like talk radio, and there was a guy being interviewed who was a record producer, and they were talking about music from the 70s, and then they mentioned the Ramones. Do you know the Ramones? Mm-hmm. And the guy said the great thing about the Ramones that was so refreshing after the 60s and 70s is that they had 3 chords, 4 words, but there was so much texture in the song. And I thought, you know, that's such a great idea. Like, what if a painting could be like that? Like, you have just a couple of elements, like the thread and the pieces and a couple of colors. But what if there were tons of information within that simple, minimalistic thing? Do you know what I mean? So that I felt like when I heard that kind of set something off in my mind. Was that what we were talking about? I can't even remember. Something about, I don't know. There's something minimalistic about a lot of these. Or the idea seems so simple, but there's a lot of textural information within the simple idea.
Almost like the longer you look, the more you see. Like,
Yeah. I hope so.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, especially in this one, actually, I feel like the longer you look at it and the more tiny little pieces you see, and you're like, oh, and there's another little red area, and then there's, I don't know, just a lot of details. So it definitely opens up to you as you look at it longer, when at first it seems extremely minimal, I guess.
Yeah. I feel like I should add, you know, some of the parts of this one in particular were really considered for a long time. And they weren't as maybe random as this piece here was really, the idea for this piece was that I didn't really know much about it. It was just going to be kind of random, like a sketch. But this one I struggled a lot with it, and I spent a long time considering the white areas with the small pieces as their own compositions. And it's funny you mentioned the red parts, because it was really important to me the way your eye would travel around the painting. And of course, the red parts your eye gets attracted to. And I kind of played with that a lot in the painting, moving different red pieces around and the white pieces.
Because we've read a little bit about you and how a lot of the work that you're doing is about playing, like you're just playing. And in playing, there's a lot of spontaneity, right? You're interested in this, and then you kind of go over here, and you kind of go over there. But then when we're talking about this one, and you're saying like, oh, I kind of am really working through that. And there's this idea of like considering the overall, construction piece of it, so this sort of detailed, oriented time with this like playing. So like, where do you find that you as an artist rest between complete spontaneity?
Well,
and
there's just
contemplation?
a back and forth, and each one has a different amount of each of those things, But always in the beginning, it's just pure play, just trying to take chances and not knowing exactly what's going to happen, kind of like science experiments in some way. So, like not caring too much in the beginning. And then as the thing develops, I feel like my options start to get narrow. And that's when I know the piece is coming into itself, that it's becoming a piece that could be finished. And it's almost like the options get more and more sort of ethical, like this has to be pink. Like it wasn't like, oh, I'll just pick pink. It absolutely, I knew it had to be pink. And it was more like an ethical choice than an aesthetic one. And I could just see that in my mind. And if I had picked a different color, if I thought, well, my sister or someone likes blue, or something like that, I'll put blue. Of course, it doesn't work. I mean, I don't know. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. You know what it has to be at a certain point, but in the beginning, you don't know specifically. But as the thing narrows down, it seems that the choices become more ethically defined. I don't know what that is, but...
Like I said, with this conversation, you and your painting, and then you sort of reach a conclusion together.
Yeah.
and you play to find that, So people
Yeah,
just say
when
this
you're
is the bottle,
playing-
and I'll have that. But
Yeah, and when you're playing, it could be anything, because you're just playing. But as the thing develops into a thing that's sort of separate from you, it becomes less a matter of random things and more of a matter of what the thing actually needs to become more powerful or more itself.
And I guess maybe just quickly, we kind of have one final question. Do you, or in your opinion, do you think that painting is still relevant method of communication, of art practice in today's contemporary art world?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Of course. I mean, yeah.
good story. Evolving, but good.
Well, thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much.
Thanks for
your
coming.
time.
Thank you for taking this trip here.
It's our pleasure. We're really lucky to be here. Yes. And we're really looking forward to tonight as well.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're coming.
Yeah.
That's good. I hope I was